Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first edition of The Story of You. Tonight, I am the pleasure of bringing to us my very first guest, Lisa J. Weiss. Lisa, I would really love it if you could explain to us how you would love to be introduced.
How I would love to be introduced. I am Lisa J. Weiss. I am the owner and founder of Eye of the Storm Coaching and Consulting. I consider myself an evolutionary alchemist. And so I think that leaves enough.
An evolutionary alchemist. I like the ring of that. Without going too deep into it, what is an evolutionary alchemist?
So my mission in terms of why I'm here is the evolution of consciousness, is helping people to connect with the core of who they are. And that involves a dash of science and a touch of magic. So hence, evolutionary alchemist.
That's such a great way to bring it about. I imagine you didn't start out young thinking, I'm going to be an evolutionary alchemist. And part of this podcast is a little bit to figure out how we became who we are right now. So what I'd like to do is take a look back and see how you started out. If you can give us a little glimpse of how your childhood started out and how you started evolving from that early age.
Well, it's been a journey for sure. I was born in Trinidad and I came to Canada when I was 4 years old. And that was actually a pretty traumatic experience for me because I came under the assumption that I was going back to Trinidad. So even though my parents and my brother and stuff were here, I thought I was going back with my grandmother. And when I didn't go back, I literally shut down. And so I have no childhood memory other than maybe 3 snippets from the time I was 4 to about 12. You know, they're very scattered. And so I vacated the premises, you know. I was here in body, but that was about it. And then at about 11, 12, I started forming memories, coming back in. So I have 2 brothers. I'm the first and middle child. I am the first for my mom, and I'm the middle child for my dad, because my older brother is my half brother. And so it was a very interesting place to be when you think of first and middle. I am the only girl. I have 2 brothers. And yeah, it's interesting. When I was growing up and people asked me what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be when I grew up, my answer always was, I want to be happy. I really had no idea who I wanted to be and what I wanted to be. And I was one of those late bloomers. It wasn't until after I got my degree from university in political science, didn't know what I was going to do with that, other than maybe run some country somewhere. And then I left for Europe thinking I was going to find some king, duke, or something that would have allowed me to run some country somewhere, being the power behind the power. That didn't work out. I came back and I started working in the PR department of the Montreal Children's Hospital. And that's where my work journey started, was there. And so I've always been in communications, some level of communications, internal, strategic, process, and then moved into facilitation, did a lot of event planning. And about 11 years ago, I started coaching, my journey into coaching. And in 2009, I launched Eye of the Storm, which then became an amalgamation of my communications work and people work, I guess you can say. And so it was only actually this year where I realized I am the capital I, capital N, internal communications expert on so many levels. I had, normal childhood. Was really good in sports. Excelled in track. I think a couple of my records are still standing back in high school. And would my parents would send us back to Trinidad when we were young, every about 3 or 4 years, and so I'm very close to my family there and here. Very close to my cousins. We all kind of grew up like siblings, more like siblings rather than cousins. And, took trips, traveled. So when I finished university, I took 9 months and I traveled across Europe and got as far as Turkey, and then spent some time with my grandmother in Trinidad and came back, fell on the train, met someone, moved to Ottawa, got married, didn't have any kids, got divorced. And now here I am. And
So,
in all that, my career just kind of went from communications, event planning, facilitation, coaching, evolutionary alchemist.
so let's break all of that down, because that was a lot of stuff, and you gave us the whole history of Lisa in a very short amount of time. So let's take that and break it down a little bit. Coming to Canada from Trinidad and the cultural shock that you felt, first being in Canada and then learning not to go back, learning that you weren't going back. How did that feel, first off?
So this is where I really can't fill in the gaps for you there, because I have no memory.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really have. So everything that I'm going to tell you is based on what I think happened, kind of thing. I could only imagine that, I came from a country, I think that my parents have told me I had never seen, white people before. And I would say, I don't like those brown people, because I didn't know the color white at that point. I was presented with my brother. Mm-hmm. So I missed the whole gestation period for my mom, because they had come up a year before sending for me. Yeah. And so I missed that whole period, and they presented him at the airport to me. And I was a little bit feisty when I was 4. And I think the words I said that I've been told were, "He might be your son, but he's not my brother. My older brother lives in Trinidad." So that's how I started my relationship with my younger brother. I think that my grandmother came because she brought me up, and I thought I was going back with her, and to find out I wasn't, because Trinidad was my world. Trinidad was climbing trees and running around with no shoes and socks and being wild child. And in Canada, we lived in an apartment, which was like a box. And it was cold in the winter. I couldn't go outside and had to be all bundled up. So when my grandmother left, I shut down. And I think in hopes of they would send me back. And when I realized that I wasn't going back, I just became, the perfect little girl that did what she was told.
And so when you started remembering things around the age of 12, what were some of your first memories?
I mean, really, it was about school, right? Because around then, I would have been finishing elementary school and then starting high school. And so typical, just typical. I was your average student, not good, not bad. I had lots of different friends. I did dance. I was good in sports. I kind of got along with everybody. I wasn't one of those in a clique kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Every year in high school, I think I hung out with a different group of people. And then I had my dance group, and then I had my arts group, and then I had, right? So I always had all these different people, and I would always bring people together. Mm-hmm. So for my parties, when I would have birthday parties and things like that, I would bring all these people together. And it was always fascinating for me to watch all these different groups, how they interacted, knowing that the only thing that they had in common was me.
What was the fascination about, do you think?
I don't know. I've always been really curious about human dynamics and how people interacted. So when I worked, when I was in college and university, I worked at the Montreal Children's Hospital as a nurse's aide. And it was the perfect job for me because I was very curious. I'm a very curious person. And I started something that they called Lisa's Rounds. So very efficient in the work that I did. So I was usually done within an hour of everything that I needed to do for the day. And so I would basically say, if you need me, page me. I'm going off to see what's happening. And I would go down all the floors and I would chat with everybody, find out what's going on, who's seeing who's fighting with whom, blah, 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 blah. And, at the time, there wasn't really any cohesion. Mm-hmm. The nurses hung out with the nurses and the doctors, and the housekeeping people hung out with them, and the nurses' aides, and the nurses would be barking at the housekeeping, and I worked with everybody. And so at that point, I started having parties. I started organizing things because, again, I knew everybody, and I started bringing them together. And when I brought them together and they got to know each other on a social level, the dynamics changed completely on the floor. Mm-hmm. Now you had nurses dating housekeeping guys and orderly guys, and everybody. It was more like a family than anything else. And I think those were probably like 12. I was there for 12 years, and they were an amazing 12 years. We had Halloween parties and Christmas parties and sugaring off parties and boat cruises and baseball games, and it was an incredible time, and I carried that. And then when I got into public relations, because I volunteered in the PR office there, I realized I got to see what was going on behind the curtain on the administration side. And so again, because I worked on the front line as a nurse's aide, and now I got to see what was going on in the back end, how do I bring them together? So then I started having talks with the new nurses coming in about how the administration could help them in the work that they were doing. And it was a phenomenal time. And I've done that everywhere I've been in my career. I've always looked around and always chatted with everybody. It was a great learning ground for hierarchy and realizing everybody's the same.
I wonder if, and this might be in my imagination, but I wonder if being plucked out of a society where you were and probably knew many people in your community to an area where you're brand new and having to start over again. I wonder if that started the evolution of looking around you and looking at the connections to try to fit that connection in.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I tell people my story, it's an interesting thought that you bring up, because yes, I was taken from a community and a culture that, yes, I had lots of family. I knew I was well insulated, and then coming here and having to form new relationships. But then what happens is, so I come when I'm 4, mm-hmm. and I adjust. And then 4 or 5 years later, my parents take me back to visit. Mm-hmm. And I'm thrilled and I'm excited because I haven't seen my cousins and my family and my granny, and I'm all excited. And I get there, and now they're looking at me like I don't belong, because now I have this Canadian accent and I'm speaking very differently. And so as much as I belong, I don't belong. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's an interesting thing that happens, in terms of how we adjust ourselves depending on where we are. And even now, when I go back, the last time I go back, because I've been Canadianized and we go out anywhere, the instructions there are, don't open your mouth until we've paid. Because otherwise they'd be getting the tourist rate and not the local rate.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's go back. What type of dance did you do?
Oh, I did it all: jazz, tap, ballet.
And what was your favorite?
Tap, definitely. Tap was
What,
my
ab-
favorite.
what about tap made it your favorite?
I think the noise, just it's like why I like typing. I love the clickety clickety click of the keys on the typewriter. Yes,
Hmm.
I grew up when there were typewriters, and tap. I just loved the sound of tap, and I'm one of those people. I love old movies, old musicals, old black and whites, and so watching Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and all those movies where tap was just it yeah, it just brought joy to me. So, yeah.
What, if you could expand upon that joy, what kind of joy do you feel when you listen to those sounds?
I mean, just not even the sound, just watching it transports you into a whole other world, right? To dance. And I would remember watching ballroom dancing with my dad, like, because he's a dancer, and that's where I get my dancing from. And although I never did the dancing that he did a lot of cultural West Indian dancing, and so I stayed far away from that. But just, yeah, and it uses, especially tap uses a different part of the brain, for what you're doing, the steps that you're learning, and you really have to not think about it. It really is a body thing, right? Your body gets used to it, because as soon as you start thinking about the steps, that's where you lose it. So there was something, whereas other disciplines, the jazz and the ballet, was more structured. I mean, there's structure in tap, but different, right? You use a little bit more of your brain in thinking about the routines and stuff like that. Whereas tap, you had to trust that your feet, once you learned the steps, your feet knew what they were doing.
And let's go to the other side of it, the sports. You were into track and running,
Volleyball, yeah.
volleyball. What part of those sports intrigued you?
It's not that it would intrigue me. I was just good. So in elementary school, I remember my gym teacher. I ran fast, and they were having a meet, and so he said, "Oh, you should come to this meet." And I didn't tell my parents, because I just thought, meet. And he showed up at the house on the Saturday morning saying, "Oh, Lisa, we're having this meet, and Lisa was going to be part of it." And they're like, "Oh." And I had no idea that you had to stay in your lane. So the first race I ran, I crossed all the lanes to get beside the person that was in the lead so that I could beat them. And, of course, got disqualified. And they had to say, "Okay, Lisa, you have to stay in your lane when you're doing this." I was naturally fast. And so track was just something that was natural for me. I didn't have to practice a lot. It was one of those things, once I got to the meet and that gun went off, I went. And so I still have my ribbons. I lost very few races. And so did the track, so the whole running and the long jump and the high jump. And I didn't do hurdles, because those involve things that you had to jump over, and you could get hurt with that. And I wasn't doing that. And I didn't do long distance either.
So the question I have to ask then is, if you found it to be of ease and it came natural in that sense, how did you keep yourself humble, or were you humble during that period of time?
Oh, absolutely. It was, track is a team sport, right? I mean, everybody's important on the team. It doesn't matter what you're doing, because overall, right, it was our school against all the other schools, right? At the end of the day, you were there for your team, for the school. And I was just a contributor to that. If we lost a race for whatever reason,
Yeah.
If it was like a 4x4, 100 or 200 or something, and somebody dropped the baton or whatever, we did our best, right? And we had fantastic gym teachers that sort of instilled that in us, that it wasn't about who we were individually, it was about who we were as a team, as a collective.
That mindset of we're a team, did it start in sports, or do you recall it starting earlier?
No, probably in sports. Like I said, I have very little memory, right? Mm-hmm. So younger. So I'm going to guess that it's, that whole aspect of team started in school with sports. I mean, I have brothers, but there's age gaps between us. There's 7 years between my older brother and me, and there's 4 years between my younger brother and me. So we kind of all grew up like in sort of different generations within our house. And so for me, that aspect of team came from school.
So let's talk about the transition from school to graduation and the start of adult life. How did that go?
Pretty good. I mean, other than the fact that I had no idea what I wanted to do, right? I got my college degree, and then I got my university degree in political science, and then it was okay, now what? And I had because I did a lot of events, all my friends were like, oh, you could work on the cruise ship as a cruise director. Oh, you could work at like Club Med as an activities director. Oh, you could. And none of that kind of appealed to me. And literally one day, it's amazing. My career was by chance a lot of times. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and she goes, have you ever thought about PR? And I didn't even know what PR meant. And she knew the ombudsman, so she introduced me. So I went down to the office and said, I'd like to find out more. I'd like to volunteer. And they said, sure. And once I started volunteering and realizing, I got access to all the stuff that was behind the scenes, that led to then going back to school and getting my certificate in public relations management, which led to a stage, which led to them giving me a contract, which led to things always just kind of happened naturally for me.
So if things happened always naturally, it started with a decision to take political science. What was that decision about?
I don't know. What else was I going to do? At the time, really. I'm not good at math, so I wasn't going to do anything in math. Didn't like history and geography, so that wasn't going to happen. My writing wasn't the best at the time, so I wasn't going to do anything. Communications hadn't even entered my mind because I wasn't that good of a writer. Political science just seemed to be, maybe I could be a diplomat. Maybe I really didn't put a whole lot of thought. Thinking back, I'm going, what was my thought process? I don't know. It just seemed interesting. It seemed like an interesting topic.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so the evolution, as we've heard it a couple times now, the evolution of moving from zone to zone to zone in a free flowing manner almost. How did you find that feeling of being free flowing and naturally moving from one thing to another?
Yeah, I was, I guess, a natural manifester and always seemed to be at the right place at the right time. So even my job when I started working at the Montreal Children's Hospital, it was my mom who had taken me in one day because a friend of hers, my mom was a nurse at the Montreal General. Mm-hmm. She had a friend that worked at the Children's who was the director of whatever. And so she was taking me in to meet her to say, hey, my daughter's looking for a job. If you hear of anything, maybe you could help her out. And we're leaving. And the woman that was whose office was across from my mom's friend, was the director of nurses' aides. She yells down the hallway, hey, did I hear you're looking for a job? Yes. Well, I have an opening for a nurse's aide. Go down to HR. That's how I got into the hospital. Right. And then in PR, right, I went and somebody introduced me, and so then I went and volunteered and loved it. And it was a small group. I'm still connected to those women today. We still get together some 30 some odd years later. And I learned a lot. And, yeah. And even when I moved from Montreal to Ottawa, I had never really looked for a job in my entire life. And, I joined the job finding club, and they pulled out a telephone book and they said, start calling. And I went, oh, all right. So I started calling and I left a message. This one company came up twice for whatever reason. So the second time I left a message. The next day I go in and I had a message, oh, someone's called you back. I call them back. I go for an interview. It's a woman who had her own company. She worked in the high-tech video and film industry, which I knew nothing about because I just came out of working in healthcare. She organized trade shows and did the PR for companies, high-tech video film industry companies doing trade shows. And she needed someone that represented well on the phone. And I have a good voice. And so she hired me because of my voice. And I said, well, I know nothing about the high-tech field, but if you're willing to teach me, I'm willing to learn. And that's how I got into the high-tech video and film industry. And then, that was part-time. At the time then, Nortel started doing they had the huge hirings, and they had this job fair. And a girlfriend called me up one day and said, hey, Nortel's doing a job fair. Let's go. Let's print off a couple of resumes and go. I went, okay. So we went. Thousands of people were at this job fair. And I'm wandering around because I'd never been to a job fair before. So I'm wandering around aimlessly. I don't know what to do. I see this one booth called Manpower. I have no idea what that is. I go in and I chat. And they say, oh, come in, do a test. I go in, I do the test. And just to go back a bit, about 3 weeks before, my husband and I were driving, and I looked at the Nortel building had big glass, and I thought, oh, it would be so cool to work there. And he kind of looked at me and went, you can't wish to work there, right? I mean, do something. And I went, whatever. Go to the job fair, meet with Manpower, go do the test. Oh, they have, an admin needs replacing for a week. Do I want to try it out? Sure. I go, I do it. Next job that comes up is event planning. They need an event coordinator to plan this huge event that they were doing. And I got the job. I'm working in the building that I said I wanted to work in. And it just, again, it all unfolded and it was a great team. It was a small team. They kept renewing my contract, and eventually they said, we'd like to hire you. And at the time, the director said he only had a position for an admin. And I went home and I talked to my husband, and he was like, well, take it, right? Because then you get your foot in the door. But I was one of those people, I thought, it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do. And I just thought, if I do that, it's kind of like taking a step back. People will always see me as that. And so I went back to him and I said, thanks, but no thanks. And apparently, because this is now later, the woman who hired me in, she said, my telling him no and my reason why actually fueled him to be able to get me in. And literally a month later, they hired me as a communications marketing person.
That's an amazing story.
And yeah.
So I know that the way that you talk about it, it's like it was a natural progression and it was just easy flowing and things just happened. But I'd like to bring to your attention the determination of choice that you made to do these things. I mean, grabbing that phone book and calling numbers in that phone book is not an easy thing for some people to do. And just hearing the way that you went, well, why would it? Well, like, I can picture in your brain how it's like, well, you just do it. You grab it, you grab the number, and you call.
Well, it was what we had to do. Like, I joined this job finding club, right? Thinking that they were going to teach me how to look for work. And literally they thumped the telephone book in front of us and said, start calling. Here are some questions to ask. And that was it. I was there for 2 days because I got work.
And then, like, I see these moments of, and I'm going to use a term that it's might be overused in some cases, and it might be underused in some cases, but I see these moments, these glimpses of greatness, as you're describing this moment of, no, I grabbed the book and I went through, and then this happened. I told the gentleman no, because here's where I'm at. And then this happened. And those moments, they're glimpses in time. It's almost like a fracture in time of you can see the moment where if you'd say yes or you say no, the paths diverge in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And it's always you choosing the path that goes on to a larger hill, a larger difficulty level, a larger learning point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think my curiosity had a lot to do with that as well, right? I think it's like, so I'm now a communications marketing person and loving the work, and our little group got disbanded, and I'm now in another group, and where was I going with this? Right. So my new group decided we needed some team building. And so my boss hired a facilitator to come in. And, this woman came in and she had us do all these activities and play these games. And I sat there going, at the end of the day, I went, you get paid to do this? To come in and play games with us? How do I get involved in that? Right? And so she goes, well, you can take this course. So I went and I found, there are courses I could take. And I was at Nortel, so they would pay for me to take the courses. So I became a facilitator, and yeah, it was just things, my curiosity, and it's like, how do I do that? I'd like to do that. How do I get in on that? And
so during this period of time, you had mentioned earlier that you were married and then you were divorced. Let's look a little bit on how did you get married? What was the evolution leading to meeting him and to becoming married?
So he rented the basement apartment, and I hadn't met him for a few weeks. Like everybody else in the gang kind of met him, but me. And when I did meet him, he was this tall, good looking, but he smoked and he was really skinny. And I just thought, okay, I don't see where, he's a nice guy. All right. And then we just kind of hung out. We started hanging out because we adopted him as part of our gang kind of thing. And then we started dating that summer. And, I was one of those people, I never really had a boyfriend, right? It was more like summer romances. And at the end of the summer, I would dump them or they would dump me kind of thing. And that summer, I was actually preparing to leave to go to Europe. So I knew this wasn't going to last because I was going off to Europe and I was going to meet some king, prince, duke, something along those lines to rule some country somewhere. I had my political science degree, and I had, and I was going for I don't know how long. I took a sabbatical from my job, which I was able to do. And, with knowing that my job would be there when I got back. And I went off And so we dated, and then he said, have a great time. And I said, I will. And I went off on this adventure. And I remember sitting on the plane going, why didn't anybody stop me? I don't know what I'm doing here, right? So I did a 21-day tour. I toured around Europe. I met wonderful people. We, toured different cities together. It was an amazing adventure, an absolutely amazing adventure that I did. And then I went back to Trinidad and spent some time with my grandmother because I knew I'd never be able to spend that kind of time with her again. And it was an amazing adventure. And it was while I was away, I realized how much I liked him. And when I finally landed in Trinidad, he was like, oh my God, thank God you're now somewhere stable. I know where you are. And I was a little slow in the romance department. I didn't have a lot, even though I had two brothers, I really wasn't good at that. And I remember one time he called and he said, hey, I got my passport. And I said, that's fantastic. And he went, yeah, so I'm thinking maybe I'll come to Trinidad. And I said, oh, that's fine. That's a great idea. Like, you'll come, you can stay with my grandparents, and, my cousins will love you. You'll have a great time. And he was like, yeah. So I'm just wondering whether or not I should buy a ticket for you to come back or not. And I went, oh. Sure. Oh my God. Okay. So we came back. I came back, and we did the long distance thing because he'd moved back to Ottawa by then. So we did that for about a year, and one of us had to move somewhere, and he would have moved to Montreal, but I decided, having grown up in Montreal and never knowing if I was going to be part of Canada with these referendums that kept happening, I didn't need that anymore. So I decided to come to Ottawa. So that's how I ended up in Ottawa. And
was there a moment, and I apologize for stopping partway through, was there a moment in Trinidad where you weren't coming back to Canada?
It's not that I wasn't going to come back. I just didn't know when I was going to come back, right? Him coming to Trinidad was the kind of, oh, okay, I'll come back. And I came back to a job that had been waiting for me, which was great. And it was one of those moments in time that you've been talking about, because I had been gone for 9 months. I had changed. I had seen these amazing places and had amazing adventures. And, like this one time I was in Brindisi, which is in Italy, and I was staying with a group of people in this little apartment, this girl that I had met on the boat to Greece. Didn't know them from a hole in the wall. And one of her roommates took me out for breakfast one morning, and we were just chatting, and we were in this square, and like hundreds, if not thousands of people were here. And I look up, and there was some sort of demonstration, and there were military police with their guns. And I kind of looked up and went, this probably wouldn't be good if my mother was watching the news and saw my face in something. So maybe we should leave. Right? But all these kind of things happened, and I changed. Mm-hmm. And I came back, and everybody else hadn't. So the first couple of weeks, everybody's listening to my stories and stuff, but nobody kind of really understood, because they hadn't left and they hadn't had the adventure, and their lives hadn't changed. And I went, oh, right, I've changed. I'm different. And so there was something there. Some seed got planted there. And it's like, okay. And then eventually you just get back into the rhythm of what life is here.
What was that feeling in the background of, I've changed, but people haven't changed around me?
Yeah, it was just recognizing that unless we pull ourselves out of the everyday, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how much more of ourselves we get to discover, right? I got to discover that I can trust myself. I can trust my instincts, right? When I'm in a train station in Paris and the hairs of the back of my neck go up and something says, and I'm in a waiting room with hundreds of people and something says, leave. I leave. No idea why, just go, right? So to learn to trust my instincts, or I get on a train going to Spain and it's an overnighter. And that's why I book a berth, right? So I have a bed and it's packed. I mean, it is standing room only on this train. And I open the door to the compartment and there are three guys, a punk looking guy, a rocker looking guy, and a kind of normal looking guy. And I went, eh? And I close the door and I look at the number and I go, surely they wouldn't put a single woman in with three men. And they did. And it was standing room only. So I had a choice. I have a bed or I can stand all night. So I went in. As it turns out, they were amazing. One was from Portugal, one was from Spain, one was from Italy. And, in my broken, because I could speak French, so I could understand the Spanish guy and the Italian guy a little bit. And they were amazing. And when it came time to sleep, they brought the berths down. They all left. They put me on the top bunk. Like, it was just trust my instincts. I learned that I could trust my instincts.
That instinct, that feeling of your instinct, how do you feel that?
It's hard to describe, right? It's like, in the work that I do, I say there's this voice inside of us. It's very clear. It's very concise. It's never more than 4 words. There's no big conversation that goes on. And so when a voice inside of me says, leave, I leave. Mm-hmm. When I open the door and my mind goes, oh, there are 3 men in here, you're going to die tonight. And I close the door and I take a breath and I go for a walk and there's nothing inside. I hear, you're safe. And I trust it. And I was. And it's hard to describe it because it's just this voice that is very clear. And every time I don't listen to it, things go very awry. It's like I've been in 3 car accidents, 2 of which I should have been dead. There was a voice before that had said, 1, rent a car. Why would I rent a car when I drive my mom's car? 1, that I was going to Wonderland. I'd come back from Trinidad one trip, stopped in Toronto, was seeing a girlfriend I hadn't seen in a long time. She was so excited. She hadn't seen me. She organized this trip to Wonderland with a bunch of people, rented a minivan. Of course, there were way too many of us. And, my mind went, no, I'm not a big Wonderland person to begin with, right? I don't go on the rides. I didn't listen to the voice. And I was sitting, so the van is packed. I'm sitting in between the 2 front seats on the hump. And I could feel the van pulling because I can feel the wheels because I'm sitting on the hump. Mm-hmm. And we take the exit. And just as we're taking the exit, this calm literally comes over me. I remember I put my head down as if I was going to sleep. We took the exit and we rolled. I should have been thrown. I should have been not a scratch on me. Second accident. Rent a car. No. Going to a wedding, not going to the dinner, but going to the reception. My date and I were going out to dinner and I'm looking for parking and I'm crossing over a street and a car's coming, bunch of girls in the car, must have been talking, laughing. The person driving stepped on the gas a little bit more than she should have. Again, as soon as I started to leave from when I pulled out from where I was stopped, this calm came over me, and she hit my door, like bang on, brought it completely in. When the police showed up, he looked at me, he looked at the car, and he was just like, how are you even walking? Other than some glass, not a scratch on me. So I'm like, obviously I'm here for a purpose. You can't take me out that easily.
I wonder if, and this might be me looking into the veil of the mystery too much, but I wonder if it took those moments to start learning to trust. Or if you had learned to trust beforehand and just made a decision to not listen in those moments.
They were moments where I chose not to listen to the voice that said, do this. Again, very clear, very concise, never more than 4 words. And when I don't listen to that voice, things go awry. And so I've learned to listen.
When was the first time that you remember hearing that voice or feeling that sensation?
I don't know. I know I was young. I would get a sense of if I was in a room with people, if something or someone didn't feel right, but it was just a sense kind of thing. It wasn't until later that I found out that my grandmother was a seer. So she saw visions, and that I actually have that ability. And so that's part of it. Right. And then going, oh, okay, this is part of who I am in terms of my connection to that self of me that knows something more than what I know. And, and it's taken time, and it's taken years, and it's part of my journey of when I was becoming a coach, there was a lot of work around listening to that inner voice and trusting what moves in my body. For a long time, I didn't trust my body. My body didn't do what it was supposed to do. I'm a woman. I'm designed to do one thing, that, have children, and I couldn't do that. Right. And so I literally had cut myself off, and I lived up here. I was very much cerebral. So I started off, I disembodied completely, left the building. As a result, I became very much in my head, very much I could walk into a room and scan the room and knew exactly who I needed to be within like 5 to 10 seconds to fit in the room. And always had scenarios running in my head. If you knew what went on in my head when I was younger, I would have been put away. All I have to say is, thank goodness I use my skills for good and not evil.
We're going to go back again to your husband. So you've met him, you've fallen in love, you've gotten married, and then something happens that you are not happy anymore. How did that evolution go? And you don't have to go in depth into it, but
yeah, for me, that's about habituation, right? That was about seeing, like, over the years. I mean, we were happy at the beginning, like everybody, you're happy at the beginning and everything's great. And and it wasn't like there was big things that happened for us. It was a slow descent into becoming our parents. Mm-hmm. Right? It would start off with the little jabs here or there, right? What people call bantering, back and forth, and it's just like over the years things just shifted, right? And I could see we were becoming my parents. We were becoming his parents, and they weren't happy people. Right? And then it was, again, not listening. Okay? Not listening to that voice. We were together for 20 years. And so, things just started to deteriorate slowly, right? Ever so. And you figure, relationships, all marriages have their ups and downs, right? Of course, there are going to be years where things aren't going to be that good, and then things will pick up. And it was never really anything massive. And, in those years, we tried having kids and, went through 2 in vitro processes, and then went through an adoption process, and none of that worked. And, that's a lot of stress on a relationship to begin with. And it was when we were going through the adoption process where I started my journey back to me. Mm-hmm. Because up until that time, I always knew who I needed to be for others, and really had no idea who I was for myself. And I started that journey back to me, and I changed the rules of the game. Right? I wanted more. I wanted more for me, and I wanted more for us. And and I remember waking up one night in the middle of the night. My whole body was just like, no, like, enough. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be. And I still didn't have the courage at that point to go, we're done. Even though my entire body was just like, get out kind of thing. But I hold a lot of intensity, so I gotta take myself right to the edge, which I did. So yeah, it was a slow descent. And would I would I have wished for it to end differently? Yes. And I know that if things didn't unfold exactly as they had unfolded, I wouldn't be who and where I am today, mm-hmm. sitting here having this conversation with you, right? It's like you said earlier, those choices sets us off on a different trajectory. And if I had made any different choice along the way, I might not be sitting here having this conversation with you right now.
Part of your story deals with immense sadness of not being able to have a child, eventually divorcing and losing the love of your life, or not the love of your life, but a love of your life. How did you go about dealing with and accepting that sadness into your life?
Well, when we went through the in vitro process, I was still in warrior mode. So it was, all right, first one didn't work, buckle up. And, the first time we heard the news, I had 45 minutes to compose myself, because I was getting on a plane to go deliver a 3-day facilitation, somewhere else. So I had to rein it in and go do what I needed to do. The second time, they put me on the strongest drugs they could put me on. And, I became crazy woman at home, because it took the energy that it took for me to compose myself to look normal for a 1-hour meeting with someone, and then lose it, when I got home, was, that was the beginning of feeling Lisa. because I always was very much, nobody knew what was going on. I said, when I vacated, no one knew what was going on behind the Iron Curtain.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was the beginning of, because of the intensity of it all, of me going, oh, there's what I feel like there's stuff that I feel in here. Right. I mean, up until that point before my journey, I think if 3 people saw me cry, that was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, yeah, so it awakened me. And then when we went through the adoption process, that's when I had started my coaching journey. And I had just finished like my first program. And so I dealt with it differently. I actually allowed myself to not be warrior, to actually, it was okay to be wounded. It was okay to be sad. It was okay to just let go, kind of thing. And yeah, and so I moved through things very differently. And even though when my ex-husband and I split, again, because I knew something different, and because I was fully connected to myself at that time, I could make a different choice. And I chose to move through it very differently for myself. And so I had lots of discoveries and insights, and allowed whatever feelings, emotions, sensations to come up. And, I've been always fortunate to have a wonderful community of friends and family around me who were always there, ready to support me if I asked for it.
That first experience of loss and the decision to become a coach, were those connected, or was the decision to become a coach an evolution previous to that, and it just coincided with...
It wasn't even a thought to it. Again, I was part of a group, a consolidation of different consultants, and there was a Christmas party. And so I went to a Christmas party, and near the end of the Christmas party, this woman sat down beside me, and I asked her what she did, and she lost it. She was so tired of people asking her what she did, and she just had a very not good conversation with someone about it. And I went, ooh, tell me more. And she invited me to an event that she was holding, and a women's event that she was holding. And in that event, it was 30 of us in this room having this conversation. And my body started to vibrate. And I went, what is this? And I said it. And at the time I was reading, Eckhart Tolle was big, and The Secret was big. And so I was reading all those books, Abraham Hicks and all of that. And that is what started me down that road. I had no idea I was going to be a coach. People had been asking me, and I'm like, no, I'm a comms person. Coaching. And I started my journey because I was curious about what this vibration was inside of me. And the woman who became my mentor, I remember one day she worked on me for 9 months because I was a tough nut to crack. And I remember her saying to me one day, I see the fire in your eyes, and you're now in the company of others who welcome that. Yeah. And I thought she was crazy because I had worked my entire life to hide that. And so it was coincidental. And again, one of those choice point moments, right? If I hadn't responded the way I responded to that woman, she never would have invited me to that gathering. I never would have had that experience, right? So it is all of these little moments and choices.
There's a friend of mine, Alicia Myronek. She calls them Myronese, my ironies. It's hilarious. But the synergies and the symphony of interconnections that just allow us the depth and breadth of decision points that we can follow along life. It's beautiful, and I love hearing the story of your decision points as you hit them and as you go, well, I'm going to go this way, because there's something inside me that just vibrates and that just tells me this is the right path.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because as you're saying that, what I realize in this moment is that we have three parts. We say mind, body, soul, right? And our mind tells us you need to go in this direction. Our body says you need to go in this direction. And then there's that spirit, that soul that says you need to go in this direction. And I recognize in many of those moments, it was not my mind and it was not my body. There was something else guiding me to make those choices, because rationally, none of them made sense. Right. And so I think that becoming attuned and aware of there's a dance that goes on, that we keep saying we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I believe that we're here to have experiences. And I don't know if it's fate, but I do know that I am the creator of my world. The I am that I am is the creator of my world. And it nudges us. And I could think back to in my early 20s where I had the nudges and I ignored the nudges. But it keeps nudging us until we're ready and willing to make a different choice.
The I am, is that where you put the I for eye of the storm?
That again came out of my original company was LT Weiss and Associates. And when I started doing my coaching, when I was do coaching, I thought, LT Weiss and Associates just isn't going to cut it for a coaching company. I need to come up with something different. And I remember I was in my backyard. It was a beautiful summer day. I put on a guided reflection and I was sitting there listening to the guided reflection, and it was called The Crucible. And at the end of The Crucible, I had 3 names. And Eye of the Storm was one of the names. Mm-hmm. And, I did the whole send it out to my friends, see what they think, da-da-da-da-da. And yet I knew and it wasn't the EYE, it was I knew that there was something about standing in that storm, knowing that this is your core being. This is the eye of the storm is always the calm place. And if we could access that with no matter what is going on in our world, in our life, everything is always going to be okay. And so that's how Eye of the Storm was born. And really, when I talk to people and they describe me, they say, well, you are like a hurricane that comes through. The place is never the same after you leave. So I've actually had to stop saying the storm is coming, because storms arrive when I say that. Literal storms arrive when I say that. Halifax Airport has been shut down, many times I have flown. Last year when I got to Hawaii, when I went to visit my girlfriend who lives in Oahu, and we are 2 major forces that come together, I flew in a hurricane that lasted for 4 days. Nice. And she was just like, we've never had to close up the house since we've been here.
And there comes Lisa, bringing the storm.
But we all know that once the storm passes, it's always beautiful, and it's always fresh, and it's always it's different.
it's the, in my mind, it's the potential difference between the bottom and the top. I mean, in my mind, if everything stays the same, you can't experience true happiness and true sadness because it's always there. But if you have that low point, it makes that high point even better.
Yeah.
And that, so after the storm, I love that too, because it's just that brightness that comes about after something so drizzling.
Absolutely. And when we're in it, right, it's hard to remember that, right? It's hard to remember that there's intelligence in this, that I will become more, right? So a lot of my work is helping people to connect, to identify, where are you in your journey? And because everyone that comes into my world is an aspect of me, mm-hmm. There are certain assumptions I can make about people who enter my world, that they have a really strong intellect, that maybe they've disconnected themselves from themselves in some way, shape, or form, that it might that they carry intensity that they may or may not be willing to claim inside themselves, right? Because I'm just like, if you're hanging out with me, you have intensity. You may or may not be willing. And people who go running, screaming from the room when they see me, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I go, oh, okay, they're just not ready to claim their intensity yet.
So part of this interview is a bit to see how you got to the point of you now. And taking all of these threads of your story, I absolutely can see how the experience and the wonder and the curiosity that is you, it came to this point to become the storm that brings about change in people. What is one thing that if you could tell one person how to start the journey of change that you are hoping to bring about in humanity in essence, and in the people you work with and in your friends and families, what would be that one nugget to start them on their journey?
There's a voice inside of you that is saying, this is not okay. I am not okay. And it happens when we are alone. It happens when we distract ourselves. And this is why 2020 and the year of COVID for me was like, woohoo! It has forced us inside, physically, spiritually, emotionally, to go in, to look at those dark corners that we have swept under the carpet. And this is not to say that it's about people who are in dire straits. I was living the perfect life. I had my husband and I had my company. He worked full time. We lived within our means. We had a nice house. We drove a nice, normal car. We never, we took holidays. I had the perfect life, and I was dying on the inside. And so it is about a willingness to tell ourselves the truth. It doesn't mean that you have to leave your partner or your kids or, wherever you are. You don't have to leave your job. It is the question of, am I willing to see and own my truth, to discover what else is possible? So my The one thing is, are you willing to hear that voice inside of you that is never more than 4 words saying, I am not happy, or help? And if there's resistance to the thought that I need help, I'd pay attention to that.
Is there anything you would like to say to people out there?
We have just entered a new age. We are in the age of Aquarius. It is about connection. And so my invitation to you is, if you are looking to create deeper, more meaningful connection, connect with me.
Well, Lisa, I would love to thank you so much for being my first guest on this interview, The Story of Us. The Story of You. And I'd like you to let everybody know where they can find you if they want help from you, or if they want to just know more about you and how to get a hold of you.
Absolutely. You can find me. I have a website, the letter I of the Storm, Coaching and Consulting. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and Eye of the Storm is on Facebook as well. So I'm on all the social media. On my website, you can book Let's Talk, which is just let's have a coffee and for me to find out a little bit about you, and for you to find out a little about me, and for us to discover where you are. I've developed this really amazing model that helps people identify where they are in terms of how they notice, interpret, and articulate what's going on inside of them. Because I think a lot of us, I know in my early journey, I couldn't articulate what was going on inside of me because I had disconnected myself from it. And so that's part of it. So I'm always available to have a conversation.